The cup was warm in my hands and it smelled wrong. Not strong, wrong. Underneath the chamomile there was something sharp and a little bitter, like a vitamin left to dissolve in water too long. She watched me hold it. That was the part I noticed first, before the smell even registered all the way. Sloane never used to watch me drink anything, but that morning she stood by the counter with her arms folded and her eyes on the steam, waiting. So I did not drink it. I told her it was too hot, and I carried it to the far side of the kitchen like I always wanted my tea to cool. Her blue thermos sat by the door with the lid off, packed and ready for work. I lifted that lid the rest of the way, and I poured my strange cup of tea straight into it, slow, so it would not splash. Then I screwed the cap back on and set it down exactly where it had been. 3 weeks later, a detective stood in my living room, holding up a small glass jar with my handwriting on the lid. He asked me when I had started saving them. I will get to that. First, you need to understand how a person ends up pouring tea into another woman's thermos at 7 in the morning and feeling nothing but calm. My name is Maureen Bennett. I am 70 years old. I live in a brick house on Foster Lane in Beloit, Wisconsin, the house my husband Dale and I bought in 1981 and paid off the year he retired. Dale has been gone 3 years now. Heart attack in the garage on a Saturday with the lawnmower half taken apart on the bench. I found him. I will not dwell on that, except to say that after a thing like that you learn what real fog feels like, the kind grief makes. So I knew this new fog was different. This one had a taste. Let me back up to how the house got full again. For 2 years after Dale died, I lived alone and I managed fine. I did my own taxes. I drove myself to church and to the Pick and Save and to my Thursday quilting circle. I was not failing. I want that on the record because so much of what came later depended on people believing I was. Then my son David lost his job at the parts plant when they moved the line to Mexico. He and Sloane had a little girl, my granddaughter Mia, who was 10 that spring. They were behind on a rental over in Janesville, and the landlord was not patient. So I did what any mother would do. I told them to come home. There was plenty of room. I took the small bedroom that used to be my sewing room, and I gave them the big one, and Mia the room David grew up in. I paid off the last of their car so the bank would stop calling. I covered the utilities and most of the groceries because David was looking and Sloane only worked part-time at a dental office front desk. I did not ask for a dime. I want you to hold on to that because it matters for what they tried to take. The house was mine. Dale and I held the deed jointly, and when he passed it came to me alone, free and clear. No mortgage, no lien, nothing owed to anyone on this earth. That brick house was the one solid thing I had left, and everyone under its roof was living in it because I said they could. I had earned that house the slow way, the only way Dale and I ever knew. 30 years of his paychecks and mine, of clipped coupons and reused foil and vacations we took in a tent because a motel was money we did not have. We burned the mortgage papers in the backyard the summer he retired, in an old coffee can, the way people did back then, and we stood there in the smoke a little drunk on lemonade and pride. That house was not just walls to me, it was every careful year we ever lived. So when I say everyone under its roof was there because I allowed it, I do not mean it coldly. I mean it the way you mean a thing you bled for. A woman who has paid for her own roof $1 hard at a time does not give it up because someone hands her a folder and a sad voice. She may not know that about herself until the day it is tested, but it is in her the whole time, waiting. They thought they were moving into a soft old woman's spare rooms. They were moving into a house with a spine. The first year was good. I will not pretend it was not. David mowed and fixed the gutters, and we watched the Packers on Sundays, the way Dale and I used to. Mia did her homework at my kitchen table, and I helped her with her spelling words. Sloane and I were never close, but we were polite, and polite was enough for me. She was 34, pretty in a sharp way, always on her phone, always a little restless in that small town like she had been promised a bigger life somewhere. I told myself that was just her age and her disappointment, and I left her alone. The tea started in the fall. That is the part I have gone over 1,000 times since. It started so kindly that I never saw the shape of it. Sloane came home one evening with a box of fancy tea from the natural food store on Prairie Avenue, the kind with a calm blue label and words like wellness and restful on the front. She said she had read that older women sleep better with chamomile and valerian, and that she worried about me up at all hours. I had mentioned once that I did not sleep well since Dale. She remembered that. At the time I thought, how thoughtful. That is the cruelest part looking back. She made it look like care. Every night after that she brought me a cup before bed. Warm, sweet, in the good china even, the cup with the little violets that had been my mother's. I drank it because a daughter-in-law I had given a home to was finally being tender with me, and I was lonely, and a warm cup at night felt like being looked after. I slept hard those nights, harder than I had in years, and I woke up wrong, slow. like my head was packed in cotton and somebody had moved all the furniture in my mind 2 inches to the left. At first I blamed my age. That is what they count on, that you will blame your age. I started forgetting small things, where I set my reading glasses, whether I had taken my blood pressure pill. One morning I could not remember the word for the thing you strain spaghetti in, and I stood at the sink almost crying, holding it, holding the colander and unable to name it. Sloane was right there when it happened. She put a hand on my arm and said in this soft, sad voice, "Maureen, maybe we should start writing things down for you." And David at the table looked up from his phone with a worry on his face that broke my heart, because it was real. He was scared for me. They were planting a garden and I was the soil. The fog got worse through the winter. There were mornings I could not follow the thread of a television show. There was a Tuesday I got in the car to go to quilting and could not for the life of me remember how to get to Linda Voss's house, a house I had driven to on the first Tuesday of the month for 15 years. I sat in the driveway and shook. Sloane found me there and helped me back inside, gentle as anything, and that night I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. Low voice. She said, "It is getting bad. She is not safe to drive anymore." She said, "I am doing everything I can, but somebody has to think about the long term. The long term." I lay in my bed and felt the cotton in my head and thought, she is right. I am losing my mind, and at least someone is here to catch me. That is how deep I was in it. I was grateful to the woman who was poisoning me. There was one morning that winter I have never forgotten, though at the time I could barely hold on to it. Sloane made me an appointment with a doctor I had never seen, a memory specialist over in Rockford, a long drive away from anyone who knew me. She made my tea extra strong the night before, and again that morning, pressing a second cup on me because it was cold out and she said it would settle my nerves. By the time we got to that office, I could hardly tell you what day it was. I sat in a bright little room and a kind young doctor asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s and to remember 3 words, apple, table, penny, and to draw a clock. I could not do any of it. The numbers slid out of my hands. The 3 words were gone before he finished saying them. My clock came out as a lopsided circle with the hands all wrong. And the whole time Sloane sat beside me with her hand on my knee, answering for me in that soft, sad voice, telling the doctor how I wandered, how I forgot the stove, how she just did not feel I was safe alone. I left that office with a paper that used the word impairment, and Sloane folded it carefully and put it in her purse like it was money. It was money. It was the first brick in the wall they were building around me, and I had handed it to them drugged and obedient, unable to count to 100. I cried the whole way home and could not have told you why. That paper is the thing that still makes me shake when I think of how close it came. Now here is the thing about me that none of them factored in. I was a medical records clerk at Beloit Memorial for 29 years. I spent 3 decades reading charts. I know what a drug interaction looks like written down. I know that confusion and dizziness and a heavy drug sleep have causes you can name, and that one of those causes is not always a tired old brain. It was sitting at that kitchen table one gray February morning that the first real thought cut through the fog. Mia had stayed home from school with a cough. She was watching me, the way kids do, while I tried to butter toast and kept losing my grip on the knife. And she said, out of nowhere, "Grandma, your nighttime tea smells like Mommy's headache medicine." I went still. I asked her what she meant. She said Mommy keeps a bottle in the cabinet over the stove, the one she stands on the stool to reach, and it smells the same, sort of sour. Kids notice smells. They are closer to the world than we are. I did not say anything to her. I buttered the toast, but something in me, some old chart reading part that had never fully gone to sleep, sat up and started taking notes. That night, Sloane brought me my cup with the violets on it. I thanked her. I held it under my nose the way you would a glass of milk you were not sure about. And there it was, sharp, bitter under the sweet, the same wrongness I would smell again on the morning of the Thermos, months later. I told her I wanted to let it cool and read a little first. She hovered. She always hovered now, I realized, until the cup was empty, so I sipped the very top of it while she watched, just enough to wet my lips, and when she finally went to put Mia to bed, I poured the rest down the bathroom sink and ran the water a long time. I slept lighter that night than I had all winter, and in the morning the cotton was thinner, not gone, but thinner. That was the first time I let myself believe the unbelievable thing. It was the tea. The next morning I did something that probably saved my life, and my house both. I went down to the cellar where Dale and I had always kept the canning jars, rows of them on the shelves, empty since the last summer I had the energy to put up tomatoes. I took 6 of the small half-pint jars, the kind with the white lids. I carried them up and hid them in the back of the linen closet behind the spare blankets, where no one in that house ever looked. because no one in that house ever changed a sheet but me. That night, after I poured most of the tea away, I did not pour all of it. I saved 2 swallows in one of the little jars, and I screwed the lid down tight. I took a black pen, and on a strip of masking tape, I wrote the date, February 19th, and I set it in the back of the linen closet in the dark. The next night I did it again. A fresh jar, 2 swallows, the date. I did not have a plan yet for what the jars were for. I just knew, the way you know to keep a receipt, that I might need to prove something to someone someday, and that no one would believe a confused old woman without it. That was the start of my real defense. Sitting in the dark behind the blankets, growing 1 jar a night. I want to tell you I felt brave. I did not. I felt sick and slow, and so alone I could have laid down on the cellar floor and not gotten up. Because here is what I had to sit with. My son's wife was doing this to me on purpose, and my son could not see it. The why came clear over the next few weeks, in pieces the way these things do. The first piece came from the mail. I had always gotten the mail. It was my house and my mailbox, and getting the mail was one of the small daily things that was still mine. But lately Sloane had taken to meeting the carrier, breezy about it, saying she was already outside anyway. One afternoon she was in the shower when the mail came, and I walked out to the box myself in my slippers, slow on the ice, and I brought it in. Most of it was the usual. But there was a thick envelope from a law office in Madison, addressed to David and Sloane Bennett. I should not have opened it. I opened it. Inside was a packet of paperwork with a cover letter, and the words at the top of the first page were guardianship of an incapacitated adult. My name was on the second page, Maureen J. Bennett. The letter thanked them for the consultation, and laid out the next steps for petitioning the court to have me declared no longer competent to manage my own affairs, and to appoint Sloane as my guardian, with control over my medical decisions and my property. My property. The house. There it was, in 12-point type. I stood in my own front hall and read it twice while the shower ran upstairs, and the strangest thing happened. The fog lifted. Not all the way and not for long, but in that one moment of pure cold fear my mind came back sharp as a tack, the way it always had been, and I understood the whole machine at once. The tea made me confused. The confusion made the case. The case would make her my guardian. The guardian could sell the house, and I would be put somewhere, foggy and quiet and signed away, while they kept what was mine. I put the letter back in its envelope. I sealed it as best I could with a glue stick from Mia's craft drawer, and I set it back in the stack of mail like I had never seen it. Then I went to the bathroom, and I was quietly, thoroughly sick. I did not confront her. I want to be honest about why, because some of you would have screamed the house down that very night, and I understand that. But I had spent 30 years watching what happens to people in the medical system who have no proof, and a relative who tells a calm, sad, organized story about them. The relative is believed, the patient is sedated, and I was the patient. If I marched out and accused Sloane of drugging me, with no evidence, while I could not remember the word for a colander, I would only be proving her case for her. She would tell the doctor I had grown paranoid. She would tell the court I imagined plots. She would have it written in a chart, and I knew exactly how much a thing written in a chart weighs against an old woman's word. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I kept drinking just enough of the tea in front of her to keep looking sick, and I poured the rest away and saved my jars. I played the part of the woman they needed me to be, while I gathered the proof that I was not her. I cannot tell you how lonely that performance was, smiling at the daughter-in-law poisoning me, letting my own son look at me with pity and saying nothing to wipe it off his face. There were nights the loneliness of it pressed on my chest like a hand. I would lie in the dark with the cotton thinning in my head and listen to my son laughing at the television downstairs, his wife beside him, the two of them comfortable in the home I had opened to them, and I would think, "You are laughing 12 feet below the woman you are erasing." I never blamed Mia for any of it, but there were mornings I could barely look at David, not because I hated him, because I loved him and he could not see me, and there is no lonelier thing on this earth than being invisible to your own child. I learned to keep my hands busy so the fear would not show. I dusted rooms that were already clean. I rewrote my grocery lists in my best hand just to prove to myself the hand still worked. I counted backward from 100 by 7s at the kitchen sink, alone, until I could do it again, building my mind back up in secret 2 swallows of poison a night at a time. Nobody saw that fight. That is the thing about being underestimated. You do your bravest work where no one is looking, and you get no credit for it. And the credit was never the point. The only person on this earth I told was Ginny Halverson. Ginny lived 2 doors down, and we had been friends since our kids were small. She was a retired ER nurse, 73, with a backbone of pure rebar and no patience for nonsense. I waited until Sloane took Mia to a birthday party one Saturday, and I walked the 2 doors down in the cold and sat at Ginny's kitchen table and told her everything. The tea, the smell, Mia and the headache medicine, the fog, the letter from Madison, the jars in my linen closet. Ginny did not gasp. That is why I told her and not anyone else. She got very still and very quiet, and then she said one word: benzodiazepines. She told me there is a whole family of sleep and anxiety drugs that, given to an older person night after night without their knowing, would do exactly what was being done to me. The fog, the falls, the memory holes, the deep drugged sleep. She said in the ER she had seen confusion mistaken for dementia more than once, when the real culprit was a pill. Then she looked at me hard and said, "Maureen, you cannot drink another drop of that tea, and we are going to get those jars tested." Hearing another person say it out loud nearly broke me in half. I was not crazy. I was not old before my time. I was being poisoned, and someone competent and clear-eyed was sitting across from me agreeing. Ginny knew a lab. Through her old work, she knew a man named Dennis, who ran a small private testing outfit 2 towns over, the kind that does drug panels for workplaces and custody cases. She said if I brought him a sample, he could tell me what was in it, quietly, and put it in writing. But she also said writing alone might not be enough. A jar of tea proves what was in the tea. It does not prove who put it there. For that, she said, you would need to catch the hand. That word sat with me. The hand. I went home and I thought about the small camera. 2 Christmases back, David had bought me one of those little video doorbells and a second indoor camera to go with it. A tiny white thing that sat on a shelf and watched the room, so that I could check on the house from my phone when I traveled. Back when I still traveled. I never used it. The indoor one had sat on the bookshelf in the den, pointed more or less at nothing, blinking its little light, for 2 years. Everyone had forgotten it was there. I had nearly forgotten it myself. That camera looked across the den toward the doorway of the kitchen. And the spot where Sloane stood every night to fix my tea, by the counter under the cabinet over the stove, was just inside its view. I want you to understand, I am not a clever woman about machines. It took me 3 afternoons, while Sloane was at the dental office and David was out looking for work, to figure out the camera again. I found the old box in the closet with the password taped inside the lid in my own handwriting, thank God. I got it talking to my phone. I cleaned the lens with my reading glasses cloth and I turned it just slightly, an inch, so the doorway of the kitchen sat dead center in the picture, and I set it to save everything it saw. Then I waited. That first night I sat in the den with my heart going like a rabbit while Sloane made the tea, and I held my phone in my lap under a magazine, and I watched the little picture. She thought I was reading. On the screen, I watched my daughter-in-law take down the blue and white wellness box, and then I watched her reach up to the cabinet over the stove, the high one, and bring down a small amber bottle. She stood on the stool, just like Mia said. She shook 2 pills into her palm, and she crushed them with the back of a spoon on a saucer, fast and practiced, like she had done it 100 times because she had, and she tipped the powder into my mother's violet cup and poured the hot water over it and stirred. Then she carried it to me with a soft smile and said, "Here you go, Maureen. Drink it while it is warm." I held that cup and I looked at that smile, and on the phone in my lap, the whole thing sat saved. The bottle, the stool, the spoon, the powder, the cup, the smile. I said thank you. I let it cool. I poured it in the jar, and I dated it. March 3rd. I had the hand. Now I needed the writing, and I needed to be smart about how all of it came out, because I had learned by then that being right is not the same as being safe. The next Saturday, Ginny drove me to see Dennis at his lab. I brought 3 jars in my purse wrapped in a dish towel. He was a heavy-set, soft-spoken man who treated those little jars like they mattered, which after months of being treated like I did not matter, undid me a little. He logged each one. He wrote down the dates off my masking tape. He asked me careful questions and wrote my answers down too, the fog, the timing, the cup, all of it, and he had me sign each page. He said it would take about 10 days, and that he would put the results in a sealed report with his signature and his license number on it. He said, "If there is something in here, Mrs. Bennett, this report will hold up." 10 days. I went home and kept performing. I think those were the worst 10 days of the whole thing, worse even than the fog, because now I was clear-headed and I had to act foggy, and clarity makes a good actress feel every lie she tells. Sloane was escalating. She had stopped waiting for the court. One evening at dinner, she brought it up in front of David, and even in front of Mia, in that gentle, reasonable voice she used like a weapon. She said maybe it was time we all talked about putting the house in a trust, to protect it, for Mia's future, so that if anything happened to Grandma, it would not get eaten up by a nursing home. She had a folder. She slid it across the table. She had even printed my name on a tab. David said, "Mom, it just makes sense. We only want what is best for you." And Mia, sweet Mia, looked back and forth between the grown-ups with a child's sense that something was wrong and she could not name it. I looked at the folder. I did not open it. I said in a slow, fuzzy voice that I was tired and I would think about it. Sloane said there was no rush, and smiled. And under the table, I am quite sure she felt the rush very much, because the lab report was 4 days out and she did not know it existed. That night she brought me my tea and I poured it in a jar and I wrote March 11th and I lay in bed and I planned. I knew by now this was not going to end with me quietly winning some argument at my own kitchen table. She had a lawyer. She had a folder with my name on a tab. She had my own son nodding along. If I simply refused to sign, she would file the guardianship and stand up in a courtroom and tell her sad, calm story, and I would have a stack of jars and a video and a lab report. The question was how to make all of it land at once, in front of the right people, so that there was no version of the story left where I was the confused one. Ginny and I talked it through at her kitchen table like two old generals. She said the jars and the report and the video were not just evidence, they were a crime. What Sloane was doing had a name, and the name was poisoning, and the place for it was not just family court but a police station. She said the moment we had Dennis's signed report in hand, we should not be arguing about trusts, we should be calling a detective. She was right. But I added one thing, and this is the part I am not entirely proud of and will not pretend I am. I wanted Sloane to know, just once, what it felt like to drink something somebody handed you and not be sure what was in it. That brings me back to the thermos. The lab report came back on a Thursday. Ginny drove me to pick it up while Sloane was at work. Dennis met us at the door and handed me the sealed envelope and a copy for my own records, and he shook my hand and said, "You were right to save those, Mrs. Bennett." I sat in Ginny's car in the lab parking lot and opened it. I will not give you all the chemistry. The short of it was this. Every jar contained a measurable amount of a benzodiazepine, a prescription sedative, the kind a person is given for anxiety or sleep, ground fine and dissolved in tea. The amounts varied night to night, which Dennis noted was consistent with crushed tablets rather than powder. There was a name for this and it was the same drug, I would later learn, that was listed on a prescription bottle in the cabinet over my stove. Prescribed to Sloane Bennett, for her own sleep. She had been grinding up her own sleeping pills and feeding them to me in my dead mother's teacup to make me look like I was losing my mind so she could take my house. I read it twice in the car, and then I folded it very carefully, and I felt something I had not felt in months. I felt like myself. The next morning was a work morning for Sloane. I was up before any of them, the way I always was. I heard her moving around getting ready, and I went to the kitchen and started the kettle like nothing in the world had changed. She came down in her work clothes and saw me there and got that little flicker of surprise she always got when I did anything on my own steam. She said, "Oh, let me make your tea, Maureen," and she did, and I watched her do the whole thing again. The box, the stool, the bottle, the spoon, the saucer, the powder, the violet cup. She handed it to me warm, and it smelled wrong, the way it always had, sharp under the sweet. But that morning I knew exactly what the sharpness was, and I knew its name, and I had it signed and sealed in a lawyer's envelope in my purse. I told her it was too hot. I carried it across the kitchen to let it cool. Her blue thermos sat by the door, lid off, packed for her shift at the dental office, and I poured my tea into it, slow, no splash. I capped it and set it back exactly where it had been. I am not going to tell you it was the wise thing to do. Ginny scolded me later, and she was right, but I will tell you why I did it, and then you can decide. I needed to know, for myself, with my own eyes, that I was not crazy, that a normal person who drank that tea would feel it. For half a year I had been told that my fog was age, my falls were age, my forgetting was age. My own son had looked at me with pity and called it age, and some sick, frightened part of me had started to believe them. I needed to watch someone drink that cup and have it touch them, so that I would never doubt myself again. That is the truth of it. She grabbed the thermos on her way out and kissed Mia's head and drove off to work. I did not poison her. I want to be clear, because the dose in 1 cup of her own crushed sleeping pill was the same dose she had been giving me every night for months and calling it care. Whatever it did to her over those few hours at a dental office, she had done to a 70-year-old woman every single night and watched her stumble. What I heard later, in pieces, was that she got very drowsy at the front desk around 11, that she put her head down and a coworker thought she was sick, that she could not keep the appointment straight and slurred a little, and that her manager, a sharp woman who did not care for her, sent her home and made a note of it, a written note, in Sloane's personnel file, about coming to work impaired. A written note. Funny how those pile up on the person who started the writing. She came home rattled and pale and scared, and she did not know why, and for the first time in months it was Sloane sitting at the kitchen table with fog in her eyes while I stood at the counter clear as glass. I did not say a word to her about it. I made her a cup of plain chamomile from a fresh box I had bought myself, and I set it in front of her, and I watched her hesitate over it, just for a second, this flicker of doubt about what was in the cup, and I thought, now you know. She drank it. Plain chamomile, nothing in it, and she watched me the whole time the way I had once watched her. That was the only revenge I took with my own hands, and it was enough. It was never about hurting her. It was about the look on her face when she could not be sure. Everything after that I did by the book, because the book was finally on my side. That afternoon, while Sloane slept off her own medicine upstairs, I called the number Ginny had gotten me for a detective in the Beloit Police Department who handled crimes against elders. His name was Detective Reyes. He came to Ginny's house, not mine, the next morning, and I brought my whole case the way I had once organized charts for 30 years. The jars, lined up, dated. The lab report, sealed and signed. The video, saved on my phone and backed up. The bottle and the stool and the spoon and the smile. The guardianship letter from Madison, and my own notebook, where I had written, in my clear clerk's hand, every date and every symptom going back to February. Detective Reyes was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up one of the little jars and turned it in the light and read my handwriting off the lid, and he asked me when I had started saving them. February 19th, I told him, the night I first let myself believe it. He set the jar down very gently, the way Dennis had, and he said, "Mrs. Bennett, in 20 years I have rarely seen anyone document a case against themselves being built and quietly build a better one right back." He told me not to go home. He did not want me under that roof for another night, not because I was in danger of the tea anymore, but because of what was about to happen. That afternoon, I packed a small bag and went to Ginny's spare room, the first night I had slept away from my own house in years, and I slept 10 hours straight with no fog and no fear, just an old woman finally safe 2 doors down. They arrested Sloane on a Friday. I was not there, and I did not want to be. David told me later, his voice breaking on the phone, how the officers came to the door and how she changed in front of him in an instant, how the gentle, worried wife who only wanted what was best turned cold and calculating and started talking about lawyers before they had finished reading her rights. He said the detective laid it out for him at the station, the lab report, the video, his own mother's jars. And David, my David, sat in that station and understood all at once that the decline he had grieved over, the mother he thought he was losing, had been a thing his wife was doing with a spoon and a stool every night while he watched television in the next room. He called me from the parking lot, and he cried so hard he could not speak for a while. I let him. I have thought a great deal about David since. It would be easy to tell you he was in on it, but he was not. He was a tired, frightened, out-of-work man who loved his little girl and trusted his wife, and was handed a sad story about his mother by the one person he should have been able to believe. He failed me. He failed me badly. With his pity and his folders and his mom, it just makes sense. But he was not the hand that crushed the pills. And when he finally saw the truth, he did not flinch from it or make excuses for her. That counts for something. It does not erase the year, but it counts. Sloane was charged with several things I am not lawyer enough to list correctly. The heart of it was that she had knowingly given another person a drug without their knowledge, in a way that endangered their life, again and again, with intent to defraud me of my property. The guardianship petition she had filed, the one meant to prove I was incompetent, became one of the strongest pieces of evidence against her, because it showed motive in her own lawyer's 12-point type. The dental office manager's written note about Sloane coming to work impaired turned up too, and no one but me ever knew the small private reason it existed. She took a plea in the end, the way most do, to avoid a trial that would have gone very badly for her. She went to prison, not forever, but long enough that Mia will be most of the way grown before her mother is free, and that is a grief that belongs to all of us, and that I would have spared that child if I could have. There is no version of this where a 10-year-old does not lose something. I have made my peace with the fact that I could not poison-proof her childhood, only her grandmother. Now I will tell you the part that matters more to me than the arrest. The fog lifted, completely. Within 2 weeks of that last cup, my mind came all the way back, sharp and quick and mine, and I cannot describe to you what it is to get your own self returned to you after you had started to believe she was gone. I drove to Linda Voss's house on the first Tuesday of the month, and I did not forget a single turn. I did my own taxes again that April, at my own table, in my own clear hand. I stood at the sink one morning and reached for the colander, and the word came to me before my fingers even touched it. Colander. I said it out loud, alone in my kitchen, and I laughed. And then I cried a little, because of how close I had come to losing even that. I went back to my Thursday quilting circle that spring, and Linda Voss hugged me at the door and said she had wondered where I had gone, and I did not yet have the words to explain that I had nearly gone somewhere I would not have come back from. The other women fussed over me the way women that age fuss, with coffee and squares of cake and gentle nosy questions, and I let them, because being fussed over by people who are glad you are alive is its own kind of medicine. I had spent half a year being handled. There is a world of difference between being handled and being cared for, and I had forgotten it, and those Thursdays reminded me. Care does not watch you drink. Care does not hover until the cup is empty. Care does not keep a folder with your name on a tab. I had let myself confuse the two because I was lonely. And loneliness will talk you into calling almost anything love. I do not make that mistake anymore. My mind, when it came back angry and clear and grateful all at once, and I have kept all three. David and Mia stayed. That surprised some people, but it should not. Where would I send my own granddaughter? Into what? Away from the one stable home she had left. David found work that summer at a tool and die shop in Rockford, steady work with his hands that suited him better than the plant ever had. He pays me a fair rent now, which I did not ask for and he insisted on, and I let him because a man rebuilding himself needs to pay his own way. We do not talk much about that year. We talk about Mia's spelling words and the Packers and whether the gutters need cleaning. But sometimes when he thinks I am not looking, I catch him watching me drink my coffee with a carefulness that is half guilt and half love, and I let him watch because we are both still healing and a son should be allowed to make sure his mother is all right. Mia and I are closer than ever. She is the one who saved me, really, that gray morning with the toast, when she said her grandmother's tea smelled like her mother's headache medicine. A child noticing a smell. That is the whole thread the rest of it hung from. I have never told her that. She is too young to carry the weight of having been the first thread. Someday, when she is grown, I will tell her what her clear little nose did for the woman who loved her, and I hope it lands as a gift and not a burden. I keep the jars. Detective Reyes returned them to me after the case closed, washed clean, and I could have thrown them out. I did not. They sit in a box on a shelf in my cellar next to the canning jars they came from. My masking tape dates still on a few of the lids. Ginny thinks I am morbid for keeping them. Maybe. But every woman should have something on a shelf that reminds her she was right when the whole house was telling her she was crazy. Those jars are mine. I earned everyone in the dark behind the blankets. Ginny and I still have our coffee most mornings. She likes to say she only gave me the word benzodiazepine and a phone number, and that I did the rest, and that is generous and not quite true. She gave me the thing I needed most, before any lab or any camera. She gave me one clear-eyed person who looked at me and believed me before there was a single piece of proof. If you take one thing from an old woman's long story, take that. When someone you trust starts telling you that you are losing your mind, and the fog seems to agree with them, find the one person who will look at you steady and say, "Tell me again from the start. I am listening." That person is worth more than the deed to any house. There was one more thing I needed to set right that spring, and it was harder than all the rest. It was Mia. She started having bad dreams that summer, and she would not say about what. And one night she crawled into my lap, though she was getting too big for it, and asked me if she had done something wrong by talking about the tea. I held her and I told her the truth in the only size a child can carry. I told her that she had been brave and right and good, and that grown-ups, not children, are the ones who decide what happens to a family, and that none of this was hers to carry. She cried herself out and fell asleep against me. I sat in the dark, holding my granddaughter, and I thought about all the ways a house can be unsafe that have nothing to do with locks. About a year after the arrest, a letter came from Sloan. I knew her handwriting on the envelope, and I set it on the counter, and I let it sit there 3 days before I opened it. It was not really an apology. It was the kind of letter that explains, that reaches for reasons, that says she felt trapped and small, and that she never meant for it to go so far. I read it once. I did not write back. I did not tear it up either. I put it in the box in the cellar, next to the jars, where I keep the true record of that year, and I closed the lid, and I went back upstairs to my life. Some things you do not forgive and do not avenge. You just file them where they belong, and you do not let them have the run of the house. I still drink tea. People are surprised by that too. I thought I might never want a cup again, but the truth is, I was not going to let her take chamomile from me on top of everything else. So most evenings now I boil my own kettle, in my own kitchen, in my own house, with my own name on the deed and no one's name on a tab in a folder. I take down a plain box of tea I bought myself. I make a cup in my mother's violet teacup, the one Sloane used to use against me, because I had it cleaned and I will not let a good cup of my mother's be ruined by a bad memory. And I sit at the table where Mia does her homework, and I hold the warm cup in 2 hands, and I smell it before I drink, the way I will smell every cup for the rest of my life. It smells like nothing now, just tea. And that, after the year I had, is the sweetest smell in the world.